it wasn't that much about whether we're really going to reach it or not. It was more about like, okay, we're going to try it anyways. And then we have done our best to try it. And that helped a lot. And I think that always helps a lot when it's not like an absolute must to reach it, but you're fine when you go and try and you do it for the purpose of doing it.
Forwardism. The joy of seeing and feeling tomorrow before it's been created. Continually challenging convention. It's a push for certainty of a better experience when we get there. This is Forwardism.
Hi everyone, my name's Yomi Adegoke and this is Forwardism, a new audio series by BMW for those who live for tomorrow today. In our series, I'll be talking to creative minds who are shaping, designing, and creating our future. In each episode, we'll put together the pieces to create a picture of tomorrow and define the concept of Forwardism and what that means to them. So, who is coming with us on our Forwardism journey today? Today's brilliant guest is the one and only Nono Konopka. Nono's an entrepreneur, producer, keynote speaker, and podcaster. And as well as building a number of successful companies, Nono decided to cycle around the world for charity with his friend Max Jabs, raising over 100,000 euro for schools in Guatemala in the process. He then went on to produce one of the most watched Netflix documentaries worldwide, Biking Borders. One question that Nono continues to ask himself is, what do I really want in life? A very tricky question. Let's see if today he has an answer for us. Welcome to the podcast, Nono. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for the lovely introduction. Nice to meet you.
You are very welcome. It was very much deserved. And I'm very much looking forward to chatting with you today.
Yeah, same here.
Oh, thank you. So we're not going to jump right into the meaning of life just yet. We're going to start with a very simple question. I've obviously already introed you, but for those who don't know what you're about, in fact, let's kind of step away from, I suppose, the kind of bio. Give us a fun fact.
Oh, wow.
Maybe that is harder than the meaning of life.
Yeah, that might be a tricky one. I don't know. People usually ask if it's my real name, Nono. Then I always say yes. That's like the one fun fact and like a kind of an important fact, I would say. So yeah, I'm Nono. That's my real name. And there's way more to the bio, so I don't know where to start.
And what interests you, Nono? What are your interests? What do you do in your spare time?
Oh, a lot of different things. Definitely entrepreneurship. So I love seeing people starting from scratch and building something which hasn't been existed before. I find that really, really inspiring. Like people pushing the boundaries, not only in entrepreneurship, also in sports and like creative work. I love that. I love seeing people basically reach their potential. So I read a lot of like biographies, etc., because I guess I like people. So I'm really interested in different journeys.
Love that. Even your hobbies sound inspiring. So our podcast is called This is Forwardism. When you think of the term Forwardism, what do you think of? How would you describe it in your own words?
I guess most of us, many times we are sitting here and we're working on like operational things to manage our everyday life. You know, like we have to pay bills, we have to like, I don't know, do the groceries, clean stuff, I don't know, whatever happens on a daily basis. So we have to do those daily things. And I guess for me, the term means that you actually like try to reduce the things which you do to operate on a daily basis and really focus on the future for yourself, but also like for anything that is greater than yourself, like other people, being a service to other people, the planet. So to basically live a bit ahead with like, the future a bit more in mind. That is how I would broadly define it for myself.
So with that in mind, how would you say And I suppose, like, in your humble opinion, you embody the concept of Forwardism, because obviously we wanted you on this podcast. So why do you think that is? What do you think about your journey, like, kind of resonates with that idea?
I mean, a big chunk of my journey, at least, I mean, the one people know about, is biking borders. So the cycling trip Max and me did when we cycled 15,000 kilometers from Berlin to Beijing. And, you know, when we started cycling, there's one fact about it. I hate cycling. I have always hated cycling. We did it for the purpose. We did it to raise initially 50,000 euros. By now it's like almost 400 for charity, for Pencils of Promise. And we wanted to build one school. And it was like such a far distant goal. Like way in the future, because we are like two students. We kind of stumbled upon this idea. We never cycled more than 10 kilometers in our entire life. We never slept outside in a tent. We never did any adventurous traveling. But we kind of believed in this idea, and we really envisioned it. And like, I don't know, manifested, some would say, that it would actually, become reality. And for me, that would be like my real definition of forwardism in my very own sense. So we were thinking in the future and putting ourselves forward into this position, and then actually made it happen. Yeah.
I cannot wait to talk to you a little bit more about biking borders, especially as someone who cannot ride a bike. I'm fascinated by how that came about. It is beyond Forwardism for me. What would you say drives you forward?
I think it like differs from time to time. I think like visions kind of adapt over time a little bit, and you kind of have to be confident about that. But for me, it's mostly trying to be comfortable with myself, how I am right now, but still simultaneously doing everything possibly in my power to reach like who I could possibly become. I always envision myself like being really, really old, and then thinking, okay, this would be like the ideal version, like everything you could have done, everything like how you could have used your time. And then I try to make this gap between this ideal version and then the version where I hopefully going to be at as small as possible.
So we are now going to get to what I've been looking forward to, which is to talk about that incredible, simultaneously quite crazy journey from Berlin with your friend Max, which our listeners can read about further in your book, Lessons for a Really Good Life, or watch in your documentary Biking Borders, which I actually watched and can very much recommend. So you both actually hate cycling, which is what I think makes it particularly fascinating, because it's not just you. It's two people that hate cycling that decide to cycle for a really, really long time and a really, really long way. So why cycling?
No, that's a really good question. So the idea popped up when I spent some time in Guatemala volunteering when I was studying in Mexico. It was like the very first time of being confronted with the fact of like being so privileged where I grew up. And like I hated school, but at this moment I realized what a privilege it has been. And then within this time, this kind of dream grew inside of me to like somehow have an impact there in Paraje in Guatemala, so this little tiny village where I was living and volunteering at this time. But I couldn't frame it, you know, because I was a student myself. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any reach. I didn't have no one to ask. I had no idea what to do. And then I went back home after 2 months because I had to finish my very own study. And I read a book called The Promise of a Pencil. And The Promise of a Pencil is written by Braun, who is also the founder of the NGO called Pencils of Promise. And they basically have a really simple but really powerful mission, which is to provide quality education all around the world. And they're doing it by building schools and by training teachers. But what I found then most fascinating when reading the book was that Adam wrote that the big chunk of donations Pencils of Promise is getting every year comes from like really normal people who would do things which are not normal, if you can frame it this way, to raise donations for Pencils of Promise. So people would like swim, climb mountains, run marathons, do whatever they consider as like being most crazy for themselves. And then I asked myself, after reading this, so what would be the one thing, like when I tell it my friends, when I tell it my family, so they wouldn't even believe me because it's so much not me. And then it was cycling. And so we chose cycling.
Okay, so Nono, we're on this bike that you hate. Let's just imagine it with me. What do you see when you're riding that bike throughout Berlin? And how does that vary from when you're riding a bike through Beijing on a sort of visual and sensory level?
Like the bike, you have to picture it this way. It's really heavily loaded. So there are like 2 bags in the front. There are 2 bags in the back. Then there's like the tent and the sleeping bag on top. There's some more stuff strapped on top as well. So you have around 65 to 70 kilograms just luggage on the bicycle, which is also 10 kilograms. So it's like, it's more than a bicycle. It's like really heavily packed. And when you look to the back, so when you kind of turn around, you see all that stuff and you're like, you take 5 times the space a normal bicycle would do on the street and you go really slow. And then I remember when we left Berlin, I mean, this was really new for me because, I mean, I never cycled before and especially I never cycled with like 60, 65 kilograms on luggage below me through a like heavily packed and dynamic and fast moving city. So we left from the city center and we went to east of Berlin. And I remember looking around, constantly checking the environment just to like not crash into anyone else on the way. And there were a lot of cars, a lot of tourists. I mean, we cycled right through the center and it attracts a lot of attention. I also remember that. So there were like little kids pointing on us. It's like, Mommy, where are they going? And we're like, yeah, to Beijing. And comparing Berlin to Beijing, this has been similar. I mean, our emotional state was obviously different. So when we left Berlin, we were like, yeah, super excited and also like afraid of what's in front of us. And then when we really managed to arrive in Beijing, everything was okay. We really made it. I mean, we're excited as well, but in a different way. But everything else on the sensory level, if you look around, the smells, the views, everything was pretty similar as both are massive cities and fast cities.
So in your documentary, it was really quite amazing to watch you guys sort of do that journey. And I would say that you actually made it, at least in some parts, look like quite a lot of fun. There was a lot of interactions with amazing people. There was skinny dipping. There was lots of food. It was like, it looked like quite an amazing experience. But then on the flip side, when it was hard, it looked like a horror film. Like when you guys were covered in the snow and you guys were just shivering. And, you know, it did look like it was incredibly difficult, not just mentally, but physically. So as you can imagine, a lot of viewers, a lot of people that are aware of your story might have thought, God, how did they keep going? Like, how did they maintain that motivation? How often did you think, because obviously in the documentary, there are moments where, you know, it seems like you guys are kind of wondering whether you can continue carrying on. But I guarantee that there's probably lots of moments that we didn't see where you were thinking the exact same thing. So how often did that thought of quitting cross your mind? And what drove you to keep going?
So we had some really tough times, especially the ones you just mentioned. When we cycled through Turkey, we had like times where we had minus 28 degrees Celsius on a bicycle, like for like almost 2 weeks in a row. So it was like incredibly cold. I have still no idea how we managed to actually cycle through it. To be really honest, we never really had this thought of, okay, let's like pack everything, let's go back, except this very one time which might sound weird, but the one time where we achieved our goal to raise the 50,000 euros for the one particular school, because we did that quite early. So when we started from Berlin, we were like, okay, we want to raise 50,000 euros, and it seemed so far away and like so impossible, because we started with like 0 followers on Instagram and 2 students no one knew. And then we had it after 12, 14 weeks. We achieved that goal, and we were in the very beginning of this journey. And this was challenging, because then your goal, which kind of kept you going, was disappearing. But then Max and me were sitting down, we were talking about it, and we figured out after a while that it is just a really big motivation for us to continue going, also because there were people following and kind of got inspiration and motivation to do things in their very own lives, just because following our journey. And this kept us going pretty much all the way to Beijing, and it still does to everything we are doing, which is related to Biking Borders,
That's amazing. I can't believe you guys only really considered turning back one time over 9 months. That's incredibly impressive. Whilst watching your journey as well, I feel like obviously it must have been, in many ways, I suppose a motivation could have been doing it with someone that you're so close to, your best friend Max, and being able to take that journey with him. But I wondered how easy that was, and whether there was any difficulty at times with working so closely with someone you're so close to. I've worked with my best friend for the past few years, and as amazing it can also sometimes be difficult in a different way because of our relationship. And I wonder if that's something you guys ever experienced.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like sometimes you literally spend 24/7 and you sleep in one tent and you cycle like next to each other the entire time. So sometimes you just like don't want to see the other person or don't want to speak to the other person. And you can't see it in the documentary, and also you can't see it because it never happened. We never had an actual fight on the entire journey. And I think the reason why it didn't happen was because we didn't do the journey because of wanderlust. You want to travel, you want to explore the world. I think then it would be like an entirely different story. But if you do it because of like a shared vision you both really believe in, of one shared goal, of one shared why are we doing this? This is why we're doing it. It makes it so much easier to do compromises along the way, because it's going to bring you closer to where you actually want to head together as a team. And that was super, super helpful. And now we are still working together, and now we sometimes need to do compromises, but it's still there. There's still like this one shared vision, shared goal, which makes it so easy to not fight.
So you mentioned social media, starting out with 0 following, 0 online presence, and then that growing exponentially over the journey. You've obviously spoken about very quickly beating the amount of money that you wanted to raise, and then, deciding to continue. These were all really huge things. I mean, Ashton Kutcher commented on you guys saying that you're changing the world 1 mile at a time. It obviously got really, really, really huge. You obviously must have set out quite optimistic, but what were your expectations, and how much, I suppose, were they broken by how huge everything got?
Yeah, that's a really good question. To be honest, we really struggled ourselves imagining really achieving our goal when we started. Because, we did the math. We were sitting down. We knew we wanted to not spend more than 8-9 months on the bicycle. And then we did the calculation. We're like, okay, we have to do around 6.5 to 7,000 euros in a month from people who would have no idea that we are even existing, because no one follows us. So this is how we actually did, you could say, the business plan, or we sat down and did the calculations. We're like, okay, that's going to be a toughie. But somehow we were so excited about the goal. We were really excited about the journey itself. We were excited about the challenge. And it wasn't that much about whether we're really going to reach it or not. It was more about like, okay, we're going to try it anyways. And then we have done our best to try it. And that helped a lot. And I think that always helps a lot when it's not like an absolute must to reach it, but you're fine when you go and try and you do it for the purpose of doing it.
So again, kind of more, still on the topic rather of social media, this type of fundraising is, it's fairly new, certainly within the past maybe decade, maybe 2 decades, certainly. There's everything from the Ice Bucket Challenge, which I think you actually showed. There's a clip of that in the documentary. There are all kinds of, Kickstarters and crowdfunders, etc. The internet can certainly be a huge tool for good. But simultaneously, when we discuss the internet, we also talk about trolls and we also talk about criticism and things like that can sort of come through having a social media presence. Looking at something like Biking Borders, which was, such a positive thing and such a positive documentary, one would hope that a sort of difficulty online was not something you guys had to deal with. But I'm interested in whether, I suppose, there were ever any concerns or fears about making your journey so public online in that way, because social media and the internet is definitely a double-edged sword at times.
Yeah, totally. I think we were really lucky with that. I think the project itself makes it really hard to hate it in a sense. I mean, why would you? You say yeah. We had some comments which were like, hey, why don't you build a school like in Germany? And we're like, yeah, I don't know. This is not the plan. But in general, it was all positive the entire time. And also in terms of the journey itself, I mean, there were obviously a lot of people concerned about where we're going because we are cycling through countries not a lot of tourists are usually going through, but everything was positive. Everything. Every human encounter we had was a good one. Always friendly, always positive. We were never treated as strangers, but always as more like friends. We spent 60 nights traveling through Iran, for example, and 58 of those nights we have been invited by total strangers into their homes who shared everything with us. So that would be my answer, I guess.
It's interesting watching Biking Borders, I think, especially during this period, where the world feels more divided certainly than it's felt in my lifetime. It really did kind of, at least in those moments watching it, kind of restore my faith in humanity and remind me how amazing human beings can be when we want to be. It was a real kind of feel-good watch.
It's amazing to hear.
So when it does come to, when we're still talking about fundraising and crowdfunding, in your opinion, and I said that the internet has kind of really changed the game in terms of fundraising. What do you think fundraising will look like in the future? If we're going back to the idea of forwardism, what do you think the future of fundraising is?
I think social media will play a bigger and bigger role in it. When we started Biking Borders, there were not a lot of people using Instagram for the purpose of fundraising and raising funds for a social cause. Right. I mean, there were obviously charities doing it, but there's one project where you start from the very beginning and you take people along pretty much the entire time until the very end, and all of that just with the one purpose of raising money for charity. We didn't see that a lot. I think now you see that more and more. So we get tagged on and sent messages from a lot of people doing bicycle trips or doing walking trips or anything crazy to raise donations. And I find that amazing. And I think this trend looking forward into the future, we will see that more and more. And I'm not sure whether it's going to be on Instagram itself or other social media platforms, but we will see, I think, a combination of using a lot of social media, using maybe also digital assets, maybe NFTs or something, which you can leverage really easily for a good cause as well. And I think that is where fundraising is going, looking into the future. If I would do it again, I would still bet on social media.
Sounds good. We kind of touched on this in the beginning, or at least I mentioned it when I was introducing you, that your LinkedIn profile asks, what do I really want How do I find out which profession is right for me? What should I do with my life? These are very big questions. So you've had some time, hopefully, to at least think about the first one, which is what do you really want? Do you know this? Because I feel like a lot of us are still figuring that out, what we actually want, whether that be from work, whether that be from life, whether that be from anything really. So do you have the answer yet?
I think it's not that much about the answer.
Right.
I think it's way more about like having the courage to ask the question again and again. So I think the answer is constantly changing. And I think overall, for me, at least right now, this would be growth. So I'm someone who gets bored really quickly. I have to do things which move really fast, really dynamic, where I kind of wear many different hats. This is why I love being in the startup world, for example, because, you do everything simultaneously and more. And this would be the answer for me. But I know for a fact that it's going to change eventually at one point, and that's entirely fine. And then I just have to have the courage to really sit down and ask the question and look for an answer again. So for me, it's way more about asking the question than giving an answer.
I mean, I know you said it's more about the question, but that is a fantastic answer. I will just say that. So your book is called Lessons for a Really Good Life. I think that's certainly a title that will have quite a few of our listeners' ears pricking for sure, because lots of us really do want to know the lessons of, what will lead to a really good life. What does a really good life look like for you right now? Because as you've mentioned, that is potentially, that's terms and conditions that could change anytime soon.
Yeah, 100%. So right now for me, it's just like trying a lot of different things and being entirely fine when I realize halfway I don't like it. Then I don't have to go through with it. That's like, for me right now, it's about trying a lot of different things, learning a lot of different things at the moment, growing a lot and being uncomfortable a lot. I think this is for me what a really good life right now looks like, but always keeping in mind that balance to everything is key. So for me, it's relaxing to do sports, for example, to do long walks, to do meditation. So to not always be on and always be working, but I sometimes struggle finding a balance in those things, and I'm getting better at it. And so right now there's a lot of about trying and balance.
What would you recommend our listeners potentially could do to bring the spirit of Forwardism into their everyday lives?
Honestly, try things. Try a lot of different things. Do them fast and do especially those things you are most afraid of. I know it sounds super cheesy and that's probably a quote we have all heard. But I know that it's super likely that those things you're afraid of, because they're more important to you, right? So they're more important to you. This is why you're more afraid about failing at them. And this is why you're more afraid about them in general. And this is why you most likely want this the most. So when someone asks me, I would always say, try one or two things, not everything at the same time you're afraid of. And do it for a long enough time to judge whether this is actually, for you or not. And this will play out really well in the future. Looking forward, if you do things now which are a bit tougher, you're going to have an easier life in the future. That's how I look at things.
This has just really made me want to buy a bike and see if there's a chance. I mean, don't hold me to it, but anything can happen. I totally agree with what you're saying. Discomfort, is definitely where growth exists. Thank you so much. So we are sadly wrapping up, but I still have a few questions for you. So you've already written a book, but let's think about your biography. Let's say maybe a few years from now. What would the first sentence of your biography be?
I'm not entirely sure on the framing exactly, but it would be something in the meaning of do hard things to have an easy life. Something like this. Entirely, and really, really sure about that.
I think do hard things to have an easy life is a fantastic way to open a book. And I think that has very much been the theme of today's episode. You're going to have us all rolling the dice and trying different things for sure. If you could tell your future self something, what would that be?
I'm excited to meet you. That would be probably what I would tell him. Because I don't plan in 5 or 10 year time periods ahead.
Right.
Doesn't work out in the industry where I'm working. I don't know about you, but like, I don't know, it feels for too long of a period to know exactly what you're going to do. So I'm just like, really curious of who I'm going to be, how I'm going to be in a couple of years in the future. And really excited to meet this person.
So my final question, sadly, is another kind of visual sensory one. I'd like you to kind of draw us your vision of what crowdfunding and fundraising will look like in 2050. Because you've already actually spoken, to be honest, about, you're still betting on social media, which I think is always a good bet. You're still thinking that it's going to be, quite internet-led. But I kind of want us to get more into the specifics of that. Use your imagination. I mean, will we finally have flying cars in 2050? Will we be advertising on the sides of those for charity campaigns? What are you seeing?
That's a really good question. So I think it will be really community driven.
Right.
Right now, Max and me, we had a tough time and we did our very best to include the entire community following around because you're just limited by technical possibilities. But looking into the future, I really envision things become more interconnected. Fundraising can be based, as said, on NFTs, for example, where everyone who has an NFT becomes part of the crowd, becomes part of the community, and together you reach more people, because obviously when you're like 500 or 1,000 people, you're a bigger crowd and you know more friends, you have more family, you have a bigger reach than 2 students on a bicycle. So I think going into the future, seeing where fundraising is going, I think it will be really creative. There will be a lot of storytelling involved. It will be really visual. People will do crazy things. Maybe someone is flying, as you said, in a rocket somewhere and takes all of us with him, with her, and does that together as a community. So I think it goes beyond our imagination of especially creativity, looking at what is already possible, looking at what has been done, for example, for Ukraine. Past month, there have been like big campaigns powered through decentralized internet, and I think we will see that more and more and more, and it will be faster. And I think this is where it's going, and I think that's also a good thing.
Thank you so much, Nono, for your answer, but more importantly, for the entire conversation. I genuinely feel very inspired about tomorrow, potentially learning a new skill. That might be biking, might be something slightly less harrowing for me. But thank you so much. It's been a true pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you a lot. It was really good.
So today's episode might be over, but as always, we'll be pushing forward in our next. Stay tuned for the next installment of Forwardism with another exciting creative mind to give you their insight into what tomorrow might bring. I'm Yomi Adegoke, and this has been Forwardism.